Welcome everyone to this Edit Girls interview with Prey editor Angela Catanzaro. If you're joining us for the first time, Edit Girls is all about elevating the voices of female and gender diverse editors who are working across TV, film, documentary, and commercial content through interviews with them about their career and their work. So if you're an editor, an aspiring editor, or simply interested in the post-production process, this YouTube channel is for you. So don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all our future editor interviews. So introducing our lovely guest today, Angela Catanzaro is a TV and film editor whose impressive list of credits include TV series Friday Night Lights, Jackie Chan's The Foreigner, and most recently, the incredible prequel to the Predator franchise, Prey. Today, we're going to be talking about the editing process behind Prey, but also delving into a bit of Angela's career as well. So first, the movie. Prey is set 300 years ago in the Native American Comanche nation. It follows the journey of a young woman called Naru, who is set on proving to her tribe that in spite of their doubts, she is a skilled warrior and knows that their lives are under threat from a mysterious hunter. And this hunter, as we know, turns out to be a highly evolved alien predator. And the film culminates in a dramatic face-off between Naru and the predator. So Angela, what drew you to this project? So start with a nice open question. I'd love to what drew you to it.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. For me, really, just that script level, it's a fantastic story. I'm always drawn to stories about, you know, a heroine. I love the outdoors. I also absolutely love cutting action movies, but I'm really also drawn to character stories, and I like very intimate moments. I love scenes without dialogue, and this really had all of those things. So it was kind of like the perfect storm for me. And I so enjoy the journey of Naru, and the visuals are absolutely tremendous. So to have that footage to work with was really, really a gift. And that was something that immediately I wasn't the first on the film, but I was able to watch a cut of the movie pretty early on, and I was so drawn to it visually. And that was very exciting to me. There was also some really interesting music moments, and I really loved the Comanche aspect of the movie. And I thought, I think this movie is very important. It is the first Comanche language dub of a film, which you can also find on Hulu. I double checked last night. It is available to stream. Yeah. So kind of groundbreaking in that way. And in my early discussions with the filmmakers, I knew they wanted to stay very true to Comanche culture and representing everything accurately. So I learned a lot on the film about Comanche and First Nations culture and language. And that was something, you know, a world that I had never been really exposed to in that way before. So all of those things really, really drew me to the project. And of course, you know, the director is a big part of it too. And we really hit it off. And I liked how, you know, careful he wanted to be about everything, and also how really open he was to experimenting in editorial. And that was one of the main things, you know, he wanted to do. And I'm always down for that, because anytime we get to flex our muscles editorially, you know, it only benefits it can only benefit the film. So I had a lot of fun exploring different, you know, structures, reordering, taking dialogue out of scenes, all of that. So that's the very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer, kind of giving it context. And I mean, it's like just going back to like the landscape and the footage, it feels like the landscape itself is a character, doesn't it? Like the way in which the landscape comes across. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, was anything shot additionally? How did the landscape and those nice big wide shots really play a role in the edit?
Yeah, well, part of the challenge, or not challenge, but I guess one of the things that we were tasked with editorially, but also when it came to sound, was creating this environment, which is which is very vast and covers a lot of terrain and, you know, hills and mountains and streams and valleys, and but really creating an atmosphere that felt at times eerie, very unique, and linking Naru and her journey and the predator within that space, so that we knew they were close to each other at times, and maybe sometimes she was on his trail and maybe sometimes he was on her trail. So we did, in terms of sound, we really tried to create a soundscape where we could identify we were in a certain location, and then when we heard certain sounds, we'd know that, oh, the other character now is in that very same location, if we weren't maybe necessarily seeing it visually. But yeah, it was very very expansive. Some of those vistas and the mountaintops and the mesas, and with some really fantastic footage. Jeff Cutter, our DP, like he's a genius. But yes, there were some reshoots and some pickups, and some incredible cheats that were done. In fact, there is there is a shot where, very early on in the film, where Naru, just before the main title, comes down from the sky, where she kind of walks with Sadi to the end of this, like she's on the precipice. And that very shot was something we added. That was shot much later at Disney Ranch here locally. And then through the magic of visual effects, we added some trees and rocks to make it appear like she was actually on that, you know, that hill or that mountain. And we did also shoot some additional footage for a sequence near the end called the burnt, we call it the burnt glade, but when they're tied to the tree, I think we shot that on 2 different occasions, reshot it 2 different occasions, because we kept changing our minds about what the dialogue should be. And so there were a bunch of little things that peppered throughout that were pickups, but hopefully it's seamless. But most of it was shot in Canada, and I certainly wish I could have been there on location, because it looks quite beautiful.
Just spotted my dog's made an appearance in the background.
Wonderful. We have a guest.
So in terms, is that quite unusual, like a luxury as an editor, to be able to really push and say, we need this additional stuff shot, or is it quite common to do that?
I usually, on a film, I'll find myself asking for 1 or 2 things. I'll run a lot of things by the director and just say things like, hey, you know, we don't have this. I'm guessing that's a choice that was intentional, but should anybody ask for it, we won't have that. Like, you know, if we're missing a line on camera, which is very rare, but you might be missing that line on camera, maybe it doesn't matter, but I just want to make sure the director is aware of that in case it does come up. There have been occasions when we'll be missing a small piece of an action scene. I just need, especially in big complicated scenes that are shooting over multiple days, it's very easy for something to get overlooked. You tend to get very, I don't know, it's almost like putting together a puzzle, and there are all these little pieces, but maybe from A to B, there's like one look or a turn that would be very helpful to get us from one beat to the next. Or if we decide, sometimes we are shooting for a very long period of time and the director has seen a version of the scene, and then we decide, we really want to excise this whole chunk of the fight, or just get from here to here, but we need a slightly different piece in order to do that. If we've got the set, or if we've got the location, we ought to go pick it up while we have that available to us. On this one, by the time I came onto the movie, there was already some idea that we were going to need some additional, or wanted some additional footage. And it was really fantastic for me, because normally when we're talking about writing scenes, I'm not even in part of that discussion usually. I mean, I get everything that's shot and that's what it is. And maybe we of course do ADR, and maybe we'll do a few pickups, but so for me, this was a great experience, because I actually got to be with, the director and the producer and the writer, and we were in the room looking at scenes, and then we'd hit pause and then say, for example, what would this line work here? And then what if we shoot this as a pickup? And then we get back into what we have. And then we depart again and add something else. And we could really get a sense of how things were going to play. And we, were able to really create exactly what we needed for the movie as it was already cut, without having to, make too many modifications. So that was something. So there wasn't anything that I mean, there may have been one or two things that I specifically asked for, but it was really a very collaborative process on this, deciding what was going to be reshot. And in some cases, we did get multiple versions of things. I feel like this is the movie of many versions. I probably did more versions of scenes than I've done on any other project I've ever worked on. But that's how we ensured, at least I hope, that we got the absolute best things in there, and it makes the most sense for the audience, and the character arcs are very clear. So yeah, it was truly a collaboration though on this one.
And you can really feel how well it's been molded in that way. Predator as a franchise, how familiar were you with it before you joined the project?
Not at all. And I was terrified because when I met with the director and the producer, I thought, oh my gosh, it sort of came up very suddenly. And I had wanted to, as always, I try to do as much research as possible. And had I had the time, I would have tried to watch all the movies. But as it turns out, it really didn't matter because it's not about preserving the franchise. It's really about Naru's story. And the Predator franchise is a part of it, but it's not the thing that is essential as a creative for you to know going in. Much like when I got hired on Friday Night Lights, same thing, that meeting came up very suddenly, and I was like, I don't even know anything about football. I don't know anything about football. And I got hired immediately after the meeting, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to find out. This is going to be horrible. I bought a book, Football for Dummies. I never had to look at it. Never had to look at it because similarly, the drama, the characters, the story, all of that functions independently from, like the Predator is an alien, and all of that stuff is just like secondary to the story. And yes, there are things that are little Easter eggs, little gifts, little nods to the Predator. There's dialogue that's directly, pulled from the original Predator movie. Raphael's gun at the end is something we see at the end of Predator 2. And yeah, so obviously since then I still haven't seen all the Predator movies, I'm ashamed to admit. But I think I've seen now 3 outside of Prey, of course. But so there are little gifts for Predator fans in there, but you certainly don't have to know the movies to enjoy this one. I feel like it is very different from the others. But we did really want to be respectful to to Predator and to the world and to the fans. So I think everything sort of adheres to what has already been established for the Predator. And there are a few new things, maybe the weapons function a little bit differently and his cloak looks a little bit differently. Visually, there's a much different look to the Predator, but in general, we tried to really respect what has already been established. And, you do hear bits and pieces of like the original Predator theme, musically, the original Predator theme in there, but it wasn't, certainly that doesn't really, drive the movie by any means. So it's its own thing, but there are little nods, to the previous Predator movies for sure.
Yeah, in full transparency, I hadn't seen them either. So I watched Prey. I loved it. I've obviously seen it a couple of times now. Then I made sure I at least watched the original so that I knew the connections. But it stands alone, but it does feel, and all the discourse and everything online certainly feels like you've projected and done the fan service side of it. So in terms of the Predator, we're first kind of introduced to the ship quite early on, and I think the Predator himself, like when he sort of lands in the cave part, like that sort of 10 minutes in. So what was the decision? Because we could have followed Naru for quite a while really, and her story, and just been completely gripped by that, but it's a Predator movie, so you had to
right.
Predator.
I mean,
so
to be honest, what you just what you described, I mean, that I was all for that version. Let's just follow her. This is great. But we did feel the need after, I think it was probably as a result of a couple screenings and feedback from the studio, who, by the way, was great to work with and very smart and also very collaborative. So that was amazing and such a gift. But you know, it was suggested that we wanted to bring the Predator in earlier because people are going to be waiting. They're going to be looking. They're going to be wondering. This is a Predator movie. It's not a you know a movie about Naru. Sadly, it's a Predator movie. So we actually shot additional material in order to bring him in earlier. Originally, there was one scene of him early on the mesa, which is what we call the area where she camps out overnight, and also where the first time we see him, where the ship flies away and he rises into frame. Well, originally that scene was one where, and it was a little bit later in the film, much later than 11 minutes, where he's kind of going through all of his weapons and his tools. But I personally, I didn't feel like it really propelled the story forward, and it was kind of like the purpose was really just to show the audience he's here, he's got all this stuff, but it didn't. I don't think it was a strong enough introduction really to him. So we jettisoned that scene very early on, and then it really felt like there was a hole, and we needed to get him in there sooner. So we actually created that scene where the ship flies out of frame and he rises and cloaks and then walks off. That was totally CG, totally fabricated, and that the background plate of that vista with mountains and the clouds, that was actually stolen from the scene that we eliminated, the scene I was just talking about. So it's basically just that plate, and then we had visual effects. ILM actually designed that spaceship, and then our other VFX vendors worked to do the CG Predator and rise and walk out of frame. So that was definitely a case where we had something from nothing, but it was a way to get him in there and establish him in the environment, so that after that moment, every time we were with Naru, we knew that there was a possibility he was there. So the purpose of that was really just to create that sense of, we know he's there. We had seen the ship earlier in the main title, but we didn't know he was actually on the ground with her. So that's what we did there. And then we also shot a scene where there's an ant that is eaten by a mouse, which is eaten by a snake, and then Predator grabs the snake and rips the spine of the snake. And then there's a Predator scene, a showdown with a wolf. And then we finally shot a scene with Predator in the cave, the Predator cave, where he's cleaning the wolf's skull and taking that for a trophy. And all of those things were just to give us a little bit of Predator and teach us about him, what his MO is. He's a hunter. He's, leveling up is what we always said about him. And yeah, so otherwise, if we hadn't shot those new beats, it would have been, I believe, until the scene with the bear. That would have been his reveal. And like I said, I kind of thought that was cool, but I guess for Predator fans, that would have been an awfully long time to wait. I think we'd be 3 reels into the movie before we get to, Predator in a Predator movie. So that's how we made the decision to add those scenes earlier on.
That's great insight as well. And I think, again, for someone looking at it not as a Predator fan originally, obviously I am now, but like looking at it and thinking about the character, it absolutely could have worked with him appearing like at with the bear sort of side, but you're given those nice little nuggets of what's driving him.
Yeah, and not too much. We were careful.
Not too much, exactly.
Little bit, not
too
to
much.
see him. You only see him in profile and in silhouette. We never reveal him until that bear scene. So it still is a reveal in a way.
One of the most powerful sort of moments for me is that wide shot of the wolf. That sort of standoff with the wolf, and then the wolf kind of falling. Obviously, we know what's happened, but it's just like, wow.
Yeah,
So
I will say
go on.
that wide shot that you're referring to, that
Yeah.
that was a pickup. So that was shot
Yeah.
at Disney Ranch, I believe it's in Santa Clarita. So,
Mm.
and just a little bit of visual effects work. I think there were some power lines and things. Not to spoil it, but I'm always fascinated by how we can, cheat these things in, and they seem like, oh, they're part of the world. You'd never know.
I think it's quite a defining thing from this film as well, just the way in which you cut those moments that a lot of them you would have expected to be close, but actually you went wide and saw the moment, like, the wolf being caught, and there's a few other moments like that as well, where you cut to a wide shot rather than going.
Yeah, well, I feel like we do see a fair amount of blood and gore, and so it's always kind of nice to step back. And it was interesting for me too, because I just feel like these the nature, the landscapes are so beautiful, and then you have all this horrible, disgusting stuff happening, and so the juxtaposition is really interesting. And so yeah, we did play with that quite a bit, when to be wide. And I'm always a fan of,
sorry, you go.
No. I was always a fan of going from like an extreme close up to an extreme wide shot. If it works in the scene, it's a really cool thing to be able to do.
It allows the imagination to go a bit more and almost feel more realistic as a viewer, almost as if you've witnessed something that you shouldn't have, like, far away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of scenes, then which do you have a favorite? Like, were there favorite scenes to cut, like ones that really stand out for you with the process of editing them?
Well, in terms of probably the most enjoyable, and this is just me, I love cutting action, and I had a lot of fun cutting that final showdown fight with Naru and the Predator in the forest at night. And that was one where there was a little bit of CG. So we had previs, we had post-vis. Some of it we just had to imagine for a little bit, but the stunts were pretty sharp there, and I always really appreciate that, so I don't have to cheat so much. I always really like to be able to see the action instead of just have things blurring through frame. I find that really disorienting and not as impactful. So when you can be with the stunts, I always find that's really a lovely thing to be able to do. So they did a great job shooting that scene. I think that, and then in that same scene, we added some beats where she's actually setting a trap for him. Those kinds of things I enjoy doing. The little mini montages, those are always very fun for me. There's another montage when she's first walking out from camp, and we have all those lovely wide shots of her on the ridges with her dog Sadi. So we played around a lot with those shots, which I enjoy, but we also wanted to weave some story into that. And that's one of the things that I'm always looking to do too. Yeah, it's nice to have a beautiful montage, but it didn't really propel the story forward. So we added a beat where she comes down a hill to a stump and finds some predator blood on a stump, and then a huge footprint which she measures. We actually stole that beat from much later in the movie, when it used to come right before she entered the mud pit area. And so just finding ways like that to keep the story moving whilst we're, in this beautiful environment, those were things I really, really enjoyed doing. We did actually have to involve VFX by using that shot, or those few shots from later, because she had already made the leash, the rope for her tomahawk. So we had to VFX that out because it hadn't yet been made when, we put the shot earlier in the film. That was fun. And then we did some intercutting of when Naru's at the river mourning her brother, intercutting that scene with her mom and making both of those scenes wordless. That was, I wouldn't say it was like, maybe action is super enjoyable, but those scenes, that kind of work is the most gratifying, the most fulfilling. So playing, we did a lot of playing around with intercutting, things like that. And I really, really enjoy that kind of experimentation.
And you don't know as well, like you said about the mourning of her brother, how powerful when you cut two moments like that together can be until you see it, I suppose.
Yeah. And it wasn't apparent until we started linking those scenes or you know, together, that their actions were very parallel. You know, Naru kind of, she leans over, the mom leans over. We've got Naru's hands in the water, and the mom's hands are, she has the bone and she's scraping, you know, the animal hide. Just very, very powerful, that parallel. And it's almost like they're feeling that pain simultaneously, so it's magnified for the audience. And the mom scene originally did have dialogue, and I think Naru's scene even had a little bit of dialogue. The dog used to come in and lick her, and you know, oh, everything's going to be okay. It was a very different vibe, and we just kept trying different things, and ultimately what we settled on was silent and with some sound design and some very minimal music, and that really drove it home. So that was yeah, that was a fun thing to experiment with, for sure.
I'd love to hear more about that pulling back of dialogue. So, you know, again, obviously you talk about silence and keeping things minimal. What other aspects, where else did you take out dialogue, and you know, how different did that make the whole thing feel? Because I feel like the whole film has such minimal, there are obviously pockets of dialogue which work brilliantly, but actually it's the scenes of quiet that really stand out. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, from right out of the gate, there wasn't a ton of dialogue in the script, but there were at least a handful of other scenes that we made into wordless moments. One of them that I think actually really benefited from removing the dialogue was the scene where Tabe becomes war chief. We call it the bonfire scene at night, and that was originally, you know, a dialogue scene. And I felt bad because the war chief, you know, the poor war chief was, you know, conducting the ceremony, and but we tried it without dialogue, and it just, you get it. Everything was right there. And in fact, by removing the dialogue, I went back into the dailies and saw there were a lot of shots that I had wanted to use, but that didn't really fit into the scene with words, just really evocative, you know, angles and rack focuses and things that were really beautiful, but we just couldn't squeeze them into the cut as scripted. So when we freed ourselves from, you know, the shackles there, we had all this other material to use. And it really, I think, made for a much more powerful scene. And with the sound design, the way we had it, we were able to mark the significant moments. And also it now plays more from Naru's perspective. She's still hung up on the fact that there's something out there, and it's, the ceremony for her is surreal because she's still reeling about the fact that there's this threat out there, and yet they're celebrating her brother as being made war chief. So for her, it's surreal. So we made it a little surreal for the audience. And then there's a point at the end where we pull out of that, and then she turns and has the conversation with her brother that follows the bonfire. But yeah, that was a big one that I think did really benefit from taking the words out. And it doesn't always work, and it doesn't always mean that the dialogue is bad. In fact, I think sometimes having the dialogue scripted and having the actors say the words is really necessary to get them emotionally to the place where they need to be, so that that performance sells the idea without the words. Like, it's very hard for an actor just to get there without sometimes saying the things that, you know, evoke those emotions. So so even though sometimes you might not use the words, do they you know, serve a purpose? Absolutely. So it really depends on the actor, the scene, and you know, what all of those things come into play. But I think it's a great exercise. If you think something might function without dialogue, it's definitely worth a shot.
Yeah, that seems incredibly powerful. And like you said, it definitely feels like we're seeing it from Naru's perspective. And I suppose as a whole, the film is always the story about her, but we really feel like we're seeing everything from her perspective. Were there other decisions that were made that helped enforce that?
I mean, every time we could, I mean, obviously there were times we're with Predator and we're even seeing Predator vision. So obviously the whole thing isn't told from her POV, but, you know, specifically the decision to not subtitle the French language, that was one that we made because, you know, she wouldn't know what they were saying. And ultimately it's not really important, but it gives you that feeling of being an outsider and not, you know, not knowing and being in this, like with, you know, people that you don't know what they're saying. Is it a threat? It's a very foreign feeling. And so, and like I said, it's not very important. If you speak French, you'll get a few of the jokes, but it's not critical to an understanding of the movie. And so that is one that we went back and forth for a while, and then ultimately decided, no, let's not subtitle it. It's not essential. And then there are other moments, sound design wise, throughout the film where we just really played up the natural sound and kept her kind of in a bubble. I keep referring it to as a bubble, but where we're just more, everything is more from her point of view. And so some sounds might be more magnified, and it's very subtle sometimes. And it's actually, unless you're sitting in a theater or have headphones on, you might not miss that, but hopefully it functions on a, you know, subliminal level for people.
I think audiences are so used to knowing everything and seeing lots of different perspectives that's another way that the film just feels really unique. There's something really unique about it, and that not subtitling the French definitely adds to that kind of uniqueness and disorienting. You expect it to be subtitled, and it's not, but you still follow the story. I think that's another aspect in terms of, like you said at the beginning, it being dubbed in Comanche, that I would happily watch it entirely dubbed and not being able to understand the language, but knowing and feeling the story, which I think is
I think it's totally possible to enjoy this movie without really you know, anything spoken in the English language. But yeah, the Comanche dub is actually unique also in that the actors themselves voice their own characters in Comanche, which is unusual. Most of the time when you have a foreign language dub, it's an entirely different set of actors that come in and do it in Italian or, you know, Swedish or whatever. And they all came back and they all had a recording session. And then we had a completely different sound team cut all that dialogue, and then a full mix in Comanche. But yeah, all the actors, with the help of some Comanche language experts, they did all that work to make that happen. So it's a really special version of the movie.
That's incredible. And again, the authenticity that you feel it in every part of the film. They've done it, you know, you've all done a really good job of keeping that authenticity. So you mentioned how you love cutting action. One of the earlier scenes with the lion hunting, talk us a bit, you know, what kinds of techniques, again, like obviously editors are going to be watching this, and people who are interested in the art of cutting, like every scene is different, obviously. But what techniques and how do you kind of start looking at a scene and the footage that you've got when you're cutting an action scene?
I mean, before I put anything together, well, I'll say it's very unusual to have all of the pieces for a big action scene right out of the gate. But I usually do try to watch everything. For big action scenes, there is usually a storyboard. You can't cut your scene to the storyboard. It never ever works out that way, but it's a good, you know, starting point for me, because then I know this is what the director and the DP had in mind, and then obviously they expand on that, you know, on set. And so I obviously have more options and you know, ways to make things work. But I start usually very methodically, actually, and kind of line different beats up on my timeline. And you know, usually if there are 10 takes of one stunt, there's usually one that's the one. And I find with action, when I'm watching the footage for the first time, really being careful. If something strikes me as phenomenal, I'm like, that's the one, that's the best, not second guessing it, because an audience is only ever going to see this once. It's the same thing when I'm cutting comedy. Your first reaction really is so important, because after that, you're going to be going frame by frame, and you might think, oh, well, the punch in this take really does actually gets very much closer, but there might be something about that first take you pulled in real time that, for whatever reason, as performed in real time, it just looks like it hurts. So I think with action, it's very important to trust your first instinct. And I always, like many editors, I cut generally without sound when I'm doing a big action sequence, just to make sure that visually everything is hanging together. And that lion scene in particular, there are a few really nice setup beats where we're just waiting and creating this tension, and you just have the sound of the wind rustling, or was it a lion, passing by behind them. And oddly, that is another scene where we changed the ending of that. She fell out of the tree and hit a rock. That was not what was originally scripted, and the fact that her brother carries her home, that was something we added. In the scene in the TV with the mom where she says your brother carried you home, that we added later. But not not to move away from the action.
No, yeah.
There were so many of those.
Hold on. Here's the word lion. Typical. I brought him in here because I thought, oh, he's going to scratch at the door, and then he's in here and he's like distracted myself. Building suspense or changing things from what was originally there. Again, it feels, like you said, like such a collaborative process that you were able to input like that.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at how malleable things are. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a note from a studio or a producer where they're like, well, why can't we do this? And you're thinking to yourself, that's ridiculous. There's no way we could ever make that happen given the footage that we have. And then if you really get into it, I would say 70% of the time you can find a way. It might not be elegant or good, it might be terrible, but you can make, generally, with the tools we have now, you really can work some magic. So even though we didn't always have exactly what we needed, we generally found ways to make what we needed. And sometimes that did involve our visual effects team, and they really they really did a lot of heavy lifting for us on this one. Worked some very, very, very long hours. But yeah, I think the work comes through. Definitely apparent.
So just sort of a nod to the whole dog conversation, the relationship between Naru and is it Sari, the dog?
Sadi, yeah.
Sadi. Tell us a bit about that and the choices and the moments where we see the dog's reaction, and how because that relationship is such a big part of the story as well. Can you talk us a little bit about editing the two of them together?
Well, one thing that was apparent when we showed the movie is that people love the dog. But of course they do. So anytime we had a chance to be with Sadi and Naru, we did it. The dog, unfortunately, wasn't a trained actor. Imagine that. But really, the dog has kind of a great story. It was adopted for this movie from an animal shelter, because it is the breed of the dog's Carolina dog, and that is historically accurate for that time and that area of the country. So that dog came right out of the shelter and went right into, I guess, immediately into training for this movie. So it wasn't a seasoned, a seasoned actor by any means. And by the way, it was a female dog named Coco. But no, that rapport, Amber Midthunder, who plays Naru, and the dog clearly got along very well, despite some of the frustrations. A very high energy dog who didn't always want to do what we needed the dog to do, but they got along very great. And I mean, the dog plays a huge role in the movie. It's, you know, the dog basically saves her from the bear by, you know, redirecting the bear, and then again at the end, you know, being there with the tomahawk so that she, you know, he could deliver it to her so that she could you know, take down predator. So all of those beats, I mean, those were, I think they were pretty much all there at script level, but we did decide to beef some of them up a little bit, knowing how well loved the dog was. And I'm also a dog lover too, so anytime I could have Sadi in there, I was looking for those opportunities. Yeah.
So before because I'd love to just get a little bit of insight into your career and a bit of, you know, advice for other editors from you. Are there any other things you want to share about the process? You're obviously incredibly passionate about this film, as you should. It's incredible. Are there any other things that you want to share about the process of
you know, there's one thing that's kind of silly, but I always fail to mention it. So I love sound, and being on the mix stage is one of my favorite places to be. And on this film, the mixers were so great, and there was a way for us all to involve some sounds from our personal life into the mix. And I actually have horses, and it turns out that an angry mare screaming is very much like the sound that the predator makes when he's, you know, hurt or injured. So I actually was able to record my horses, and then those got woven into the mix. And actually my sweet girl horse Nova makes an appearance twice in the final predator fight. It's very tucked in the mix, so you wouldn't know it unless you were really listening for it. But that was a cool way to, you know, weave in something personal for everyone. And Dan, the director, his daughter, her laughter is in the film as well. So it's fun little things like that. Put a little, you know, personal stamp on the sound.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm listening out for it. And it leads on really nicely to, you know, because you it's not show jumping that you do. Is that eventing, did you say? Or
eventing, yes. Yeah. So eventing is well, it's really 3 disciplines. We do a dressage test, and then a cross-country course, and then show jumping. Mm-hmm. So it's usually, the events are held over 3 days, and each discipline has its own day. And yeah, it's a pretty fun sport. There's lots of, you know, it's a huge adrenaline rush, which is why I do it. But I've always been, I guess, once a horse girl, always a horse girl. And it is tough to get in the hours and the training that I need to be able to compete and also work. But it just, you know, sleep is always the thing that gets sacrificed, unfortunately. But I do feel like that really is my therapy. And so even though sometimes it's tough to manage the schedule, I really do need that in my life. So I always try to figure out a way to make it happen. And
there must be such discipline behind it that actually complements both parts of you being an editor and an equestrian.
Yeah, well. It is tough though, because rarely, if ever, are the schedules on, well, at least on this movie, for example, we never knew what each day was going to be. I might get, you know, call that, oh, we need to be at Fox at 8 a.m. And then so I'm like canceling my trainer and all this stuff. So it's hard. I'm very much a planner, and I like to have a schedule. So that's probably the hardest part of doing both of these things, you know, writing and then also editing, is because I don't ever know what each day is going to bring. And then, you know, of course, a horse will have a medical thing on like your most important day. And so it's important to have a great team at the barn, good trainer, coach, other people that you can rely on to help you when you're, you know, stuck working, which happens a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, it is good training, and it's good to be regimented, and also just to be able to physically do something. I mean, editing is like you're just sitting, mm-hmm. and it's horrible, you know. And I do try to stand and kind of split my time when I'm watching dailies. for the first time, I'll generally stand. And then for some reason, when I'm cutting the first version of the scene, I like to sit. But I mean, you're just stuck in a room. And then when you're working long hours at a studio, they're feeding you too. So you're just sitting and standing and eating, sitting and standing and eating. And it's terrible. So it is really important for me to try to get in that physical activity too, because otherwise I just end up feeling horrible. So, yeah,
it's one of the traps, isn't it? You end up
Yeah.
behind a computer and you're enjoying it, you're creative, and then you come and your whole body is like
Right.
stiff. Yeah.
Like I can't stand up straight on the left without excruciating pain, you know, things like that. You're not aware of when you're working. Like my posture gets horrible and all of that. So yeah, it's good to have a balance, I guess.
Definitely. So just going back to like how you got into editing in the first place, can you just tell us like just a little bit about what, you know, when did you first realize you wanted to become an editor? Was it that clean cut? Like how did your career start?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and at the time when I was like in high school, I had no idea really that you could, I mean, of course people make movies, but I just didn't register that was like a career that was available to me. And but I was very into photography. I was very into theater. I loved writing. I loved poetry. I played a bunch of instruments, not very good at any of them, but I played a bunch of them. And so all of these things, you know, you find in film. And I actually came out to go to school here on the West Coast at UCLA, and I got interested in the film school and really started to realize that this is like something that was a possibility for me. Like I could combine all of these things that I really love in filmmaking. And so I went to film school there, and I had some pretty late nights just solo in the little edit bay, and we were working on not even on an Avid, not on computers, but on a flatbed editing console with 16mm film. And there's just something absolutely magical about the physical act of splicing that together, and like smelling the emulsion and having your hands all cut up. And I took an experimental film class, and I shot a little film by myself, which I don't recommend shooting film by yourself. It's impossible. With my poor sister helping me out. I lugged a camera kit and a light kit all the way home to St. Louis to do it. But anyway, but cutting all that footage together in that room, just, it was like mesmerizing and magical. And you'd walk out, and 4 or 5 hours, maybe more, had passed, and time just flew. And I felt like that was something it just felt very magical to me. And so I started really exploring the possibility of film as a career. And then I got very interested in sound and decided that sound editing was really where I wanted to be. And then mixing, I wanted to be a mixer. And I did a bunch of odd jobs in sound, and I actually got to work on some pretty cool things, restoring 35mm prints, sound prints. And I did Foley a couple times on a couple small projects, but I never really found a way into the business. So, but I wasn't discouraged. I just thought, well, maybe I'll just, see about this Avid editing thing. And so I, unfortunately, at the time for UCLA undergrads, we didn't have an Avid available to us, if you can believe that. So I did take an extra class outside of UCLA to learn how to cut on the Avid. And that led to my first assistant editing job on an indie feature. And then that was sort of it for me, because once I realized that I could also do sound while assisting or cutting picture, I was sold. So I sort of never went back after that. And that was really, that was it for me. I just thought, even though it was horrible working, as most people do when you start out, you're working like horrible hours, sometimes overnight. Back then, Avids were very expensive, so you're always sharing a system with an editor. And we were digitizing dailies from tape. You can believe that. But even then, I just thought it was like such a magical process, and I got to do all of the things that I loved. Editing is really writing. You're rewriting stories. So, and there's, oh my gosh, so many things you can do with music. And so it's everything for me. It's got it all.
Yeah, you get to be part of all of it. Sound, you know, even the visual effects in a way, you can comp some stuff together and like
yes, I'm pretty terrible at it.
Yeah, but it's to drive the story forward. You can still like, yeah.
I'm good at giving directions about what I'd like to see. It does involve an imagination though. And so it definitely, it's got all those things that I fell in love with early on. And specifically music. I know a lot of editors don't like to do their own music and really want a music editor on all the time. And I love it when a music editor is available to help and be there. But if there is time in the schedule, I love finding temp music for things. I love experimenting with film score and combining scores, or that type of experimentation is really interesting to me. How much you can alter a scene just based on the music,
So if you were to give someone at the beginning of their career, or even, before that, like just wanting to pursue a career as an editor, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things for me starting out was to reach out to people. I was always afraid of putting someone out, or somebody thinking like I'm weird, or why would this person be reaching out to me? But developing your network as early on as you can and meeting as many people is really, really critical to finding work, finding jobs. I think a lot of times our success is luck. We're finding ourselves in the right place at the right time. But the more people that you know, the more likely you are to be in the right place at the right time with the right people who know about opportunities. So don't be discouraged if somebody doesn't get back to you. Reach out to people, try to, if you are somehow able to get into a cutting room and shadow an editor, shadow an assistant, so that you really have an understanding what that job is. Those are phenomenal opportunities. And then if you're already working as an assistant and you think you might want to cut, do it. You should always ask permission first, but hopefully you're working with an editor that would encourage you to do that. It's really important to develop those skills so that if you have the opportunity, you can show somebody what you've done, that you can do the job. I was really lucky. The first show that the show that I got bumped up on to edit on, the two editors I was working with at the time, they really pushed me to cut. I mean, I wouldn't say they like locked me in my room at night, but it was pretty much like, you need to do this, or you're just, you're not going to have this chance. They, I guess, knew that there was a possible opening for an editor slot. So they knew a little bit more than I did. And they really put the pressure on for me to cut some scenes to show the executive producer. And thank goodness they did, because that's how I got my chance to cut. But, without them, I might not have done it. So you really have to just kick yourself in the pants a little bit and like, really somehow get over that fear of failure. We all fear failure, and not everybody is going to love everything you do all of the time. So you have to get used to taking notes, constructive feedback. But you just need to start. That's the hardest part, cut a few scenes, get some notes, get some feedback. Anything you can get your hands on. I know assistants are generally really busy and don't always have time to do that, but if you can make the time, it will really, really be beneficial to your career. Nobody's going to give you a chance to cut unless you've proven to them that you can. So you need to be able to do it. So do it as soon as you can.
Oh, I love that. I kind of went into a trance listening to you. So before we finish, and again, thank you so much. This has been
my pleasure.
What's next on the horizon for you? Can you tell us anything that's coming up, or?
I'm currently working on a series for Apple, an Apple TV series, and I'm just finishing up right now 2 episodes of the 10 episodes that will be, I think, out in April of 2023, but who knows what they'll do with the schedule. The show is called Dear Edward, and it is, once again, I'm working with Jason Kadams, who I've worked with over the years on and off for 16 years, since Friday Night Lights, so 15 years maybe. So I have a very long relationship with him, and I'm so grateful that I can still, you know, participate in his projects. And then after that, which will be ending very shortly, I'm planning to take a break. So hopefully for at least a few months. And then I don't know. So we'll see. It's always exciting and terrifying at the same time.
A well-deserved break and an important thing to do, right? If you can, step back.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And to anyone watching this, like, please, like, write comments, like, let us know what you think, and let us know what you think of Prey, of the movie.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kim. So
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
You're welcome.
Take care.